Have you ever wondered how faith can completely transform your life? Or how can genuine trust in God sustain you in the most difficult times? In this video, we'll explore Jesus' most powerful teachings about faith, lessons that not only challenge our doubts, but also reveal the immense power that faith can have to move mountains, calm storms, and open doors to miracles. These teachings are not just ancient stories, they are an invitation for you to experience something profound and transformative today. If you have ever faced uncertainty, felt afraid, or had doubts on your path, this video is for you. By applying these lessons to your life, you will see how faith can give you strength, courage, and peace, even in the face of the greatest adversity. But before we continue, I would like you to leave a comment with the phrase, "I believe, Lord, increase my faith." By writing this, you are affirming your trust in God and opening your heart to experience something greater. Let's together make this phrase a declaration of faith that transforms. Furthermore, each comment strengthens this community of faith and could be the beginning of incredible change in your life. Let's get started. Verse 1, Mark 9:23. All things are possible to him who believes. Jesus encounters a distressed father, a man who had tried everything to heal his son without success. This father's desperation is something many of us can relate to, when we face challenges that seem greater than our strengths. It is common to feel powerless. At this moment, Jesus offers us a simple but profound answer. All things are possible to him who believes. This verse teaches us that faith has unlimited power. It is not a question of human ability or favorable circumstances, but of genuine trust in God. Jesus is not telling us that faith is a magic wand that makes everything happen exactly as we want, but rather that when we believe, we open the door to the impossible. Faith allows us to see beyond our limitations and the barriers that life imposes on us. Think of faith as a bridge. When we are faced with an abyss, be it a health problem, a financial difficulty, or an emotional crisis, faith is the bridge that connects us to the other side, to the side where the solution and healing is. Sometimes this bridge seems fragile to our eyes, but Jesus assures us that if we have faith, it is strong enough to sustain us. This teaching also challenges our tendency to want to control everything. When Jesus says, "All things are possible," he invites us to surrender control to God. It's natural to want to solve everything on our own, but true faith calls us to trust, even when we don't have all the answers, even when the solution seems distant. Jesus reminds us that God has the power to transform any situation, no matter how impossible it seems. Thus, this verse is an invitation for us to believe beyond our circumstances. No matter how great the challenge before us, faith enables us to trust that God can do what seems unattainable. Verse 2, Matthew 17:20, "If you have faith as a mustard seed." Jesus uses a powerful and simple metaphor to illustrate a profound concept about faith: the comparison to a mustard seed, one of the smallest seeds known. By saying that a faith as small as this seed is enough to move mountains, Jesus shows us that it is not the quantity of faith that matters, but its quality and potential. The mustard seed is small, almost imperceptible, but when planted and cultivated, it grows into a large tree. So is faith. Even if, at certain times, we feel that our faith is small, almost non-existent, Jesus teaches us that if this faith is true, it has immense transformative power. It's like planting a seed. When fueled by trust in God and perseverance, that faith can grow and accomplish things that once seemed impossible. This metaphor also reminds us that faith doesn't have to be grand from the beginning. We often think that we need to have an unshakable, gigantic faith for God to hear us or grant our requests. However, Jesus invites us to start with what we have, even if it is a small faith, almost like a glimmer of hope. He assures us that this small flame is enough to light great fires of transformation in our lives. Faith, like the mustard seed, also requires cultivation. It is not enough to just believe superficially. It is necessary to nourish this faith with prayer, trust, and action. An active and persevering faith is one that does not give up in the face of challenges. Just as the mustard seed needs soil, water, and light to grow, our faith needs to be strengthened by spiritual practices and daily trust in God, even in moments of uncertainty. Jesus, when using this metaphor, also calls us not to underestimate the power of little. A small seed of faith can move mountains, not because we have extraordinary strength, but because God acts through that faith, no matter its initial size. It is a reminder that, with God, the impossible becomes possible, as long as we are willing to believe and persevere. So the lesson here is clear. Don't worry if your faith seems small. Plant it in the soil of your life, take care of it with perseverance and trust that God will make it grow, transforming your reality and allowing you to achieve what seemed beyond your reach. Verse 3, John 11:40. If you believe, you will see the glory of God. In this verse, Jesus speaks to Martha in one of the most moving and dramatic moments of the Gospel, the resurrection of Lazarus. Martha, still shaken by her brother's death, is surrounded by grief and pain. Even though she knows who Jesus is, she faces the difficult reality of dealing with loss, and her faith is mixed with doubt. It is in this context that Jesus gives him a profound lesson about faith. If you believe, you will see the glory of God. Here, Jesus teaches us something fundamental. Faith comes before the manifestation of divine power. Many times in our lives, we want to see first and then believe. We want tangible proof, clear signs that things are going to change, that God is acting. But Jesus reverses this logic. He challenges us to believe first, to trust fully, even when everything around us seems to say otherwise. Believing before seeing is like walking in a dark room, knowing that even without seeing, the light is just ahead. Faith is what guides us through the darkness of life when challenges and difficulties surround us. Jesus tells us that if we have this confidence, this faith that precedes the evidence, then we will be able to see the glory of God. Glory here represents divine power and presence manifesting itself in a transformative way. This verse also reminds us that faith connects us directly to divine intervention. The glory of God is not something we observe passively. It is something we experience in a profound way when we choose to trust His plan. When we believe, we make room for God to work in our lives in ways we could not imagine. Faith is not a guarantee that everything will be easy, but it is the certainty that, with God, we will see results that transcend our expectations. Think of faith as a leap in the dark, with the knowledge that there is an invisible safety net, and that net is God's care and grace. In Martha's case, Jesus was about to accomplish something humanly impossible, bring Lazarus back to life. But before performing the miracle, he asks Martha to believe, even without seeing it. And the same applies to us. Before we see the answer to our prayers or the solution to our problems, we need to believe that God is in control. Therefore, this teaching of Jesus calls us to trust fully, even when we do not yet see what we desire. Faith is not about waiting for evidence. It's about believing that God's hand is already in motion, even if our eyes can't see it yet. When we learn to believe like this, we open our hearts to experience the glory and power of God in a true and transformative way. Verse 4. Matthew 21:22. Whatever things you ask in prayer, believing, you will receive. Jesus in this verse teaches us about the power of prayer when it is done with genuine faith. He tells us that prayer, accompanied by deep belief, has the power to connect us directly to the will and action of God. This promise is not simply about asking and receiving anything, but rather about the need to believe, to truly trust in the power of God, for our prayers to be effective. Prayer in itself is a conversation with God, but Jesus shows us that the essential ingredient for this conversation to transform into something powerful is faith. It is not enough to pray mechanically, repeat empty words, or make requests without believing that God can, in fact, act. True prayer, the one that touches the heart of God, is the one that comes from a place of trust. It's like talking to someone you trust completely, knowing that they always do what's best for you. Faith is what makes the difference between a just spoken prayer and a powerful prayer. When we pray in faith, we are placing our desires, fears, and concerns in God's hands, trusting that He knows what is best and can accomplish things beyond our understanding. This trust changes the way we pray as we begin to not only ask, but also rest in the certainty that God is in control. Think of prayer as a seed we plant. If we plant this seed without believing it will grow, we probably won't take care of it properly. But if we have faith, we water this seed carefully, knowing that at the right time, it will flourish. Likewise, when we pray in faith, we don't worry about the how or the when, but we trust that God is taking care of every detail. This confidence also helps us accept that the answers will not always come the way we imagine. Sometimes what we ask for is not what we really need, and faith allows us to accept that God, in His wisdom, knows what is best for us. When Jesus says, "By believing you will receive," He is not saying that we will receive exactly what we want, but that with faith we will always receive what is best for our lives. Therefore, this teaching of Jesus calls us to pray with confidence, knowing that God hears every word and responds according to His will. Effective prayer is not about pressuring God to do what we want, but about trusting that He is working, even when we don't immediately see it. When we pray in faith, we surrender our concerns to God and at the same time allow ourselves to rest in His sovereignty, knowing that He always works on our behalf. Verse 5. Luke 8:25. Where is your faith? In this verse, Jesus and His disciples are in a boat crossing the Sea of Galilee when a great storm arises. The waves are strong, the wind howls, and the boat begins to flood. The panicked disciples wake Jesus, who was sleeping, crying for help. Calming the storm with just one word, Jesus turns to them and asks this question: "Where is your faith?" Jesus' question goes far beyond the immediate situation. He is not only questioning their fear in the face of the physical storm, but also their lack of trust in His presence. Jesus was with them in the boat, but even so, fear took over. This reflects something very common in our lives. When the storms of life surround us, financial problems, health crises, family conflicts, we often forget that Jesus is with us. The storm the disciples were in is a metaphor for the difficulties and challenges we face. We all go through moments of turbulence when it feels like the waters are about to drown us. At these times, our faith can weaken, and, like the disciples, we ask ourselves, what now? What am I going to do? But Jesus' answer is clear. Where is your faith? He reminds us that faith is the anchor that keeps us firm even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. Faith, then, is not the absence of storms, but the certainty that even in the midst of the worst adversities, we are not alone. Like the disciples, we may feel scared and powerless in the face of life's problems, but Jesus invites us to trust that He is in control. He is able to calm the storms, and even when they don't cease immediately, His presence is enough to give us peace in the midst of chaos. Think of faith as an invisible shield. When the storms of life come, and they come for all of us, faith is what protects us from the direct impact of the difficulties. It does not prevent problems from appearing, but helps us to face each one of them with courage, confidence, and serenity. When we trust God, we know that no matter how fierce the storm, we are safe in His hands. This verse also teaches us that faith is not something that disappears when things get difficult. In fact, it is in storms that faith proves to be most necessary and powerful. It's easy to trust God when everything is fine, but true faith shows itself when we are in the midst of difficulties, and yet we choose to believe that God is in control. Jesus, by calming the storm, demonstrates that He has power over all things, including situations that seem uncontrollable to us. Therefore, when Jesus asks us, "Where is your faith?" He is inviting us to remember that no matter how difficult the situation, He is there and sustains us. Verse 6, Matthew 8:13. Go, let it be done according to your faith. This verse is part of the story of the Roman centurion, a man of authority who seeks Jesus to heal his servant, who is seriously ill. The interesting thing here is that the centurion does not ask Jesus to come to his house. He believes that with just one word from Jesus, his servant will be healed. He demonstrates genuine and unshakable faith in the power of Christ, and so Jesus responds, "Go and let it be done according to your faith." This passage is a powerful example of intercessory faith, faith that speaks on behalf of another person. The centurion was not asking for something for himself, but for the life of someone who depended on him. He believed so deeply in the power of Jesus that he didn't even feel the need for his physical presence for the miracle to happen. This shows us that when we pray in faith for someone, God hears and responds, not only based on the person's situation in question, but also on our trust and belief in His power. The centurion's faith was not limited by visible circumstances. He did not let the fact that Jesus was not physically at his servant's side weaken his belief. On the contrary, he understood Jesus' spiritual authority, just as he understood his own authority as an official. Likewise, when we pray in faith for those we love, our prayer can move mountains, even if we are far away, physically or emotionally. Faith knows no barriers, whether of time, space, or circumstance. This intercessory faith is like a bridge we build for those who cannot cross it on their own. Imagine someone is stuck in a difficult situation without the strength to pray or believe. Our faith can be that bridge that connects us to the power of God. Just as the centurion fully trusted that Jesus could heal his servant, we can believe that God can work miracles in other people's lives through our sincere, faith-filled prayers. This teaching also reminds us of the power of words. The centurion recognized that Jesus, with a simple order, could transform the situation. We often underestimate the impact of our prayers and words of faith. When we intercede for others with trust in God, we are releasing the power of healing, transformation, and hope into their lives. Genuine faith not only changes our reality, but also that of those we pray for. Therefore, "Go according to your faith be done" is a reminder that our faith doesn't just benefit ourselves. She has the power to reach others, to intercede for those we love, and even for those we barely know. God honors intercessory faith, just as he did with the centurion, showing that when we trust him on behalf of others, he is faithful to act. When we believe in the power of Christ and sincerely intercede, we can see miracles happening in the lives of those around us. Verse 7. Matthew 15:28. Great is your faith. In this verse, Jesus praises the faith of a Canaanite woman, a foreigner who came to him seeking healing for her daughter. At first, it appears that Jesus ignores her, and the disciples even suggest that he send her away. But even in the face of initial rejection and cultural and religious barriers, this woman does not give up. She insists, demonstrating such deep and persistent faith that Jesus ends up saying, "Great is your faith," and healing is granted to her daughter. This episode teaches us about the power of persevering faith. The Canaanite woman faced many obstacles, not only being a Gentile in a Jewish culture, but also Jesus' apparent resistance. However, she was undeterred. Her faith was greater than the fear of rejection or the social norms that tried to stop her from achieving what she sought. She knew what she wanted, believed Jesus had the power to give it, and refused to give up. Many times in our lives, we are faced with obstacles that make us question whether we should continue to believe. Doors seem closed, answers don't come, and we feel discouraged. But this woman's story shows us that persistent faith is one that overcomes barriers, that does not give up, even when it seems that circumstances are against us. Persistent faith is like a tree growing among rocks. Even if the soil is hard, even if the conditions are not ideal, it finds a way to take hold, grow, and flourish. The Canaanite woman teaches us that when our faith is firmly rooted in trust in God's power, no obstacle can stop us from achieving what we seek. Jesus didn't just praise the woman's faith, but her great faith. It reminds us that true faith is not passive. She is active, determined, and willing to overcome challenges. She does not give up easily when faced with a negative response or temporary silence. Instead, persistent faith continues, knowing that God is in control and that His goodness will prevail. Furthermore, this story teaches us that God is no respecter of persons. Although the Canaanite woman was not part of the Jewish people, Jesus recognized her faith and granted her request. It reminds us that faith is accessible to everyone, regardless of who we are or where we come from. God doesn't care about our origins or status. What He values is the sincerity and persistence of our hearts. Therefore, "Great is your faith" is a compliment we can all aspire to. He challenges us to be persevering, to continue believing, even when we face rejections or apparent obstacles. True faith does not give up. She continues to knock on the door, even when it seems like no one is listening. And like the Canaanite woman, when we demonstrate this unwavering faith, we can experience God's power and mercy in ways that transform our lives. Verse 8. John 20:29. Blessed are they who have not seen and yet have believed. In this verse, Jesus speaks to Thomas, one of his disciples who doubted the resurrection until he could see and touch the nail marks in Jesus' hands. Thomas needed physical proof to believe in the miracle of the resurrection. When Jesus finally appears to him and allows him to see and touch his wounds, Jesus pronounces a profound truth. Blessed are they who have not seen and yet have believed. Here, Jesus highlights the importance of faith without the need for visible proof. Faith, by its nature, is believing in what cannot be seen. In a world where we constantly seek evidence and certainty, believing without seeing is a challenge. We want proof, signs, tangible guarantees before we commit to something. But Jesus invites us to a different faith, a faith that does not depend on what our eyes can see, but on what our hearts can trust. He teaches us that true blessedness, true happiness and fulfillment is in believing even when there are no visible signs that confirm our hopes. This faith, without physical evidence, is comparable to walking in fog. We don't see the entire path ahead, but we trust that with each step, something new will reveal itself. It's a kind of trust that transcends what is logical or provable, and that can be difficult. However, Jesus assures us that those who choose to trust God without seeing, those who maintain faith even when circumstances provide no guarantee, are especially blessed. Thomas's story reminds us that the desire to see before believing is human, but it also challenges us to overcome this need. Many times on our spiritual journey, we will not get all the answers or signs we desire. We won't always see what's coming or how God is working. But Jesus invites us to trust the invisible, to believe that God is working in our lives, even when we can't see what He is doing. This faith that believes without seeing is what connects us to the invisible power of God. Imagine a farmer who plants his seeds. He doesn't see what happens underground, but he believes that at the right time, something will grow. In the same way, our faith is the seed planted in the invisible soil of God's grace, and it will blossom at the right time, even if, for now, we cannot see the results. Jesus calls those who maintain this faith blessed. And this blessedness does not just mean a future blessing, but a peace and confidence in the present. When we believe without seeing, we experience the peace of mind that comes from knowing we are in the hands of a loving and faithful God, even if we cannot understand all the details of His plan. Therefore, blessed are they who have not seen and yet have believed, is a call to deep trust in God. It's a reminder that faith doesn't need proof to be real, and that we are blessed when we learn to trust God, even without seeing. This trust frees us from the need to control everything and puts us in a position of openness to what God is doing, even if we can't yet see the results. Verse 9, Matthew 14:31. O you of little faith, why did you doubt? In this verse, Jesus is speaking to Peter, one of his disciples, after a moment of deep tension. Peter had gotten out of the boat and was walking on the water towards Jesus, but when he realized the strength of the wind and the danger around him, he began to sink. In fear, Peter cries out for help, and Jesus immediately holds him back. It is then that Jesus gently rebukes him, saying, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? This passage clearly illustrates how doubt can undermine our faith and prevent us from experiencing the full power of God. Peter had started well. He had demonstrated courage by getting out of the boat and walking on the water, trusting Jesus' word. But the moment he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the circumstances around him, the wind, the waves, fear and doubt began to creep in. And it was this doubt that made him sink. Doubt acts like a weight on our faith, pulling us down when we should be walking forward with confidence. It's like trying to run with chains on your feet. The more we give space to doubt, the more we feel paralyzed, unable to move forward. Jesus shows us through the story of Peter that faith is what keeps us above the turbulent waters of life. However, when we let difficult circumstances or fears take up more space than our trust in God, we begin to sink. This episode is also a call to trust completely, especially in moments of greatest vulnerability. Like Peter, we often start out in good faith, but as the winds of difficulty blow stronger, we let fear and doubt take over. The problem is not that we have no faith, but that our faith is small in the face of adversity. And Jesus invites us to grow in this faith, to trust more deeply even when the waters seem dangerous. Think of doubt as a fog that prevents us from seeing clearly. When Peter began to doubt, he lost sight of Jesus, and fear made him believe he was in danger even though he was under Christ's protection. This also happens to us. When we focus more on the storms around us than on Jesus, doubt begins to blind us and make it seem like God's help is far away, when in fact He is always near, ready to hold us. Jesus, when rebuking Peter, is not only pointing out his error, but also inviting him to greater faith. He is reminding us that even when the world around us seems to be falling apart, we must keep our eyes on Him. Doubt prevents us from seeing God's power in action, while faith allows us to overcome life's most difficult challenges. Verse 10, Mark 4:40. Have you still no faith? In this verse, Jesus once again confronts His disciples about their lack of faith, this time during a storm while they are all in a boat. The scenario is frightening, the strong wind, the waves crashing against the boat, and the disciples, overcome by fear, wake Jesus up crying for help, worried that they would sink. Jesus calmly gets up, rebukes the wind and the sea, and the storm calms down. Then He turns to the disciples and with a mild rebuke asks, "Have you still no faith?" This question from Jesus is a profound call to reflection. The disciples had already witnessed many miracles and wonders performed by Jesus, but even so, in the midst of the storm, fear took the place of faith. This teaches us an essential lesson. Fear, when allowed, can easily take over our minds and blind us to the power of God. The storm, which should have been an opportunity for the disciples to practice their trust in Jesus, became proof that we often let the circumstances around us overshadow our faith. Jesus was in the boat with them. He had not abandoned them, and yet fear made the disciples feel alone and vulnerable. This also happens in our lives. When storms arrive, whether in the form of crises, losses, or difficulties, our first instinct may be fear, and fear makes us forget that Jesus is with us, even in the midst of the turmoil. Jesus' presence on the boat was all the disciples needed, but they let their fear speak louder than their faith. This rebuke from Jesus, "Do you still have no faith?" Zrenie, nie prosta krytyka, no I приглашение. An invitation to have a firm faith, a faith that does not waver at the first sign of difficulties. He invites us to trust Him, not only when the waters are calm, but also and especially when storms arise. The true test of faith comes not in moments of tranquility, but when chaos seems to be all around us. Fear, when allowed, acts like a thief, stealing our peace and distorting our perception. It's like a shadow that grows and becomes bigger than reality. When we let fear take over, we begin to imagine the worst possible scenario, forgetting that God is in control. But Jesus calls us to break out of this mental prison and trust, knowing that He has the power to calm any storm in our lives, whether external, such as visible difficulties, or internal, such as anxiety and worries. The firm faith which Jesus invites us to cultivate is like an anchor that keeps us safe, even when the winds blow strong. Having faith does not mean that we will never be afraid, but rather that we do not allow fear to guide our actions and thoughts. It's a daily choice to trust Jesus, even when everything seems to fall apart. Therefore, when Jesus asks, "Have you not yet faith?" he is calling us to examine our reactions to difficulties. Are we allowing fear to control us, or are we trusting that with Jesus by our side, we are safe no matter the storm? This is a question we should all ask ourselves when we face challenges. Jesus' response to the storm was immediate and powerful, but he expects our faith to be equally steadfast in the face of the winds of life. Well, throughout the teachings we explored, we see that faith is not something static or easy. It requires persistence, especially when circumstances around us seem challenging. Faith does not mean that we will never face difficulties, but that when they arise, our trust in God will sustain and guide us. Faith is a constant choice to trust, even when we don't see the answers right away. Jesus teaches us that regardless of the size of our faith, what really matters is its sincerity, the genuine trust that God is in control, even when everything seems uncertain. If we have this sincere faith and persist in it, we will see the power of God manifesting itself in profound and transformative ways. In the end, faith is an invitation to trust with our eyes closed, knowing that God is always guiding us towards the best. With sincere and persistent faith, we can live more fully, more connected to God, and more strengthened in the face of life's challenges.